$8. That is what I paid to rent a motorbike for a full day in Pakse, southern Laos. $8. A tank of fuel on top of that, another $3. A hand-drawn map from the guest house owner, a direction up into the Bolaven Plateau. I had no specific plan, no itinerary, no booking confirmation for anything. Just a motorbike, a road, and a plateau that sits 1,000 meters above the Mekong Valley, where the air is cool, the coffee is extraordinary, the waterfalls drop through jungle that has barely been touched, and the villages look exactly as they did 50 years ago. What I found up there is one of the best days I have had anywhere in Southeast Asia, and it cost $11. Let me tell you about the Bolaven Plateau first, because most people who visit Laos never make it here, and that absence from the tourist trail is exactly what makes it worth going. The plateau sits in southern Laos, rising steeply from the flat Mekong Valley around Pakse. The road up switchbacks through dense forest, gaining altitude quickly. Within 30 minutes of leaving the city, the temperature drops noticeably. The air changes, cooler, cleaner, carrying the smell of forest and moisture. At 1,000 meters, the landscape opens into something unexpected. Rolling hills, not the dramatic karst mountains of northern Laos or the flat river plains of the south. Gentle, rounded hills covered in coffee and tea plantations, punctuated by waterfalls that drop off the plateau edge into the valley below, surrounded by ethnic minority villages that have farmed this land for centuries. The Bolaven Plateau produces some of the best coffee in Asia. Arabica beans grown at altitude, the same conditions that produce the complex bright flavors of Ethiopian and Colombian coffee in a country better known for Robusta grown at lower elevations. The coffee here tastes different, fuller, less bitter, with a fruity quality that cheap Vietnamese Robusta does not have, and it costs 50 cents a cup at a roadside stall run by the family that grew the beans. The road out of Pakse climbs quickly. Within 20 minutes, the city is behind you and the forest is on both sides. The motorbike handles the gradient well enough. You are not racing, you are ascending, and the pace that the road demands is the right pace for what you're about to see. The first village appears about 40 minutes out of Pakse. It sits at the edge of the plateau, where the land flattens out and the coffee plants begin. Wooden houses, some on stilts, some not. A temple at the center, as there always is in Lao villages, however small. Chickens moving through the spaces between houses with the purposeful aimlessness of chickens everywhere. I stopped, not because anything dramatic happened. Nothing dramatic happened. A man was fixing something in front of his house. A woman was hanging, washing between two trees. Children were doing what children do when they have no particular obligation, moving around, investigating things, occasionally shouting at each other. I stopped because the scene was so completely ordinary and so completely unlike anything in my daily life that it required stopping. The man fixing something looked up. We exchanged the Lao greeting, a slight bow with hands pressed together. He returned to what he was doing. That was the entire interaction, and it was exactly right. The coffee plantations start in earnest about an hour from Pakse. The plants are not what you might imagine if you have never seen coffee growing. They are shrubs, really, dense, dark-leaved, growing to about chest height, planted in rows that follow the contour of the hillside. In season, the cherries, the fruit that contains the coffee bean, are bright red among the dark leaves. The smell of a coffee plantation in the morning is something I did not expect. It is green and slightly earthy and faintly sweet. Not the roasted smell of coffee you buy in a bag, something more alive than that. I stopped at a small roadside operation where a family was processing coffee outside their house. A hand-cranked pulper was removing the fruit from the beans. The beans were spread on bamboo mats to dry in the sun. An older woman gestured for me to sit. She brought coffee, thick, dark, sweet, served in a small glass with condensed milk, without asking whether I wanted it. I drank it slowly. The coffee tasted like the plantation smelled, green and alive. Underneath the roast, we did not share a language. We shared the coffee and the morning and the view down the hillside toward the valley far below. That was enough. The waterfalls of the Bolaven Plateau are the other reason to make the loop. Fane is the most dramatic. Two parallel streams dropping over 200 meters into a jungle gorge, one of the highest waterfalls in Southeast Asia. The viewpoint looks across the gorge to the falls on the opposite side. The scale is difficult to process. The sound reaches you before you see anything. A low, constant rumble that grows as you approach the edge. I arrived at Fane early. The mist from the falls had not yet cleared. It rose from the gorge in a column that caught the morning light and turned everything at the viewpoint soft and white and slightly dreamlike. There were two other visitors. We stood at the edge and looked across at 200 meters of falling water and did not say anything for several minutes. There is a zip line across the gorge at Fane. It crosses directly above the falls. The sensation of crossing above that volume of falling water, the sound, the spray, the scale of the drop below, is one of the more extraordinary physical experiences available in Laos if you are inclined toward that kind of thing. I crossed it. Once was enough, but once was extraordinary. Yuang is different in character, less dramatic in scale, the drop is smaller, but accessible in a way that Fane is not. You can walk down to the base, the pool at the bottom is swimmable, the water is cold and clear, and the jungle closes in on all sides so that the sky is a narrow strip of blue above the green walls of the gorge. I swam for 30 minutes. Not another person in sight. In Vietnam, a waterfall this accessible and this beautiful would have a ticket booth, a restaurant, a souvenir market, and 100 visitors before 10 in the morning. In Bolaven, the waterfall was empty. The jungle was quiet. The water was cold. I floated on my back and looked at the strip of sky and thought, this is what they mean when they say undiscovered. The villages on the plateau are ethnically distinct from the lowland Lao population. The Bolaven Plateau is home to several ethnic minority groups, the Katu, the Alak, the Sway, who have farmed this land for centuries and whose cultures and traditions are distinct from both lowland Lao and the majority Vietnamese and Thai cultures that dominate the region. The villages of these groups are not tourist attractions. They are not arranged for visits. They are simply there, living their lives on the plateau that their families have lived on for generations. The houses are different from lowland Lao construction. Some groups build communal longhouses. Some build individual family homes with distinctive architectural details, carvings, specific roof shapes, decorations that carry meaning within the community's tradition. I passed through several of these villages on the loop. In most of them, I did not stop. Passing through felt more respectful than stopping to look when my presence was neither expected nor invited. In one village, I stopped because my motorbike needed fuel, and a man outside a small shop had a hand-painted sign that suggested he sold it. He did. Fuel in a repurposed water bottle dispensed through a funnel into my tank. The transaction cost $2 and took 10 minutes and involved a great deal of gesture and goodwill from both sides. While this was happening, a group of children gathered at a safe distance and watched with intense concentration, as if the refueling of a motorbike was a significant event worth documenting mentally. When I left, they waved. The simplicity of that, the children, the wave, the fuel in a water bottle, the $2 stayed with me longer than the waterfalls. Let me be honest about what the Pakse Loop requires. The road is not always good. The Bolaven Plateau has sections of smooth tarmac and sections that are rough enough to make your hands numb after 30 minutes of continuous riding. After rain, some sections become muddy and require care. $8 a day gets you a basic motorbike. Not new, not powerful, but reliable enough for the roads you will encounter if you treat it with reasonable care. Check the brakes before you leave Pakse. Check the fuel. Make sure the lights work. You may need them if you are out later than planned. Navigation is imprecise. The loop is well enough known that you can find maps online and in Pakse guest houses. But the signage on the road itself is minimal, and in Laos, you will take wrong turns. This is part of the experience rather than a problem to be avoided. Carry water. The plateau is cooler than the valley, but you are still in a tropical climate and you are riding in the sun. Drink more than you think you need. Carry some cash. Card payments do not exist outside Pakse. Small notes are better than large ones at the roadside stalls and village shops you will stop at. Tell your guest house where you are going. Mobile signal on the plateau is inconsistent. If something goes wrong, someone should know roughly where you are. The full loop takes one long day or a more relaxed 2 days, with an overnight at one of the small guest houses in Paksong, the main town on the plateau. The 2-day version is better. It lets you see the waterfalls in the morning light and gives you an evening on the plateau when the temperature drops and the coffee plantations go quiet, and the stars over the Bolaven are extraordinary in the absence of any light pollution. I got back to Pakse as the sun was setting over the Mekong. The motorbike was dusty, I was dusty. My hands had the particular stiffness that comes from a day of gripping handlebars. I sat at a riverside restaurant and ordered a beer Lao, the national beer, cold, extremely pleasant after a day in the sun, and a plate of food I pointed at on someone else's table because the menu was only in Lao. The food was excellent. The beer was excellent. The river was moving slowly in the last of the light. I thought about the day, the coffee from the woman who brought it without asking, the waterfall mist in the morning, the children watching the refueling with such concentrated attention, the pool under Yuang with the strip of sky above it, the wave from the children as I rode away. $11. the motorbike and the fuel, the rest of it was free. And the rest of it was the whole point. The Pakse Loop through the Bolaven Plateau is not on most people's Southeast Asia itinerary. It does not have the fame of Angkor Wat, or the beauty of Halong Bay, or the beaches of Phuket. It has coffee that tastes like the plant it came from, waterfalls with nobody at them, villages that are living their lives without reference to your presence, roads that go somewhere worth going for $8 a day. That is enough, more than enough. Get on a motorbike, go up to the plateau, stop when something pulls you. You will find your own $11 day. Thanks for watching. Have you done the Pakse Loop? Tell me what you found in the comments. And if you want to see my full video on Luang Prabang in northern Laos, that video is already on the channel. See you in the next one. Let me go back to the coffee, because it deserves more than a passing mention. Laos is not famous for coffee the way Vietnam is. Vietnam is the second largest coffee producer in the world. Every conversation about Southeast Asian coffee starts and ends with Vietnam. But here is what most people do not know. Vietnamese coffee is predominantly Robusta, a variety grown at low altitude, high yield, strong and bitter. The coffee culture that Vietnam is famous for, the strong dark drip coffee, the egg coffee, the iced coffee with condensed milk, is built on Robusta's intensity and affordability. The Bolaven Plateau produces Arabica. At 1,000 meters, the conditions are right for a variety that requires altitude and cool nights, and specific soil conditions that the plateau provides. Arabica is the bean that specialty coffee culture is built on. Ethiopian Arabica, Colombian Arabica, the beans that specialty roasters in London and New York and Melbourne pay premium prices for and then charge $5 a cup to serve. On the Bolaven Plateau, Arabica grows in small family plantations. The families pick the cherries by hand. They process them using equipment that is simple and effective and has not changed significantly in decades. They sell the beans to small roasters in Pakse Loop or dry and roast them at home. The cup of coffee I drank at the roadside plantation cost 50 cents. The woman who brought it to me had grown the beans, processed them, and roasted them herself. That cup of coffee, in that context, at that altitude, with that view down the hillside, was one of the best cups of coffee I have ever had. I am aware that context does a lot of work in that sentence. The altitude and the morning and the company of the woman who made it, without asking if I wanted it, all contribute to the experience. But I also brought some of the beans home. I made them in my own kitchen, months later, with proper equipment and careful attention. They were still extraordinary. Buy coffee on the Bolaven Plateau, as much as you can carry. Let me tell you about Pakse Loop, the main town on the plateau, and the place where most people doing the 2-day version of the loop spend the night. Pakse Loop is not a destination in itself. It is a market town, functional, unpretentious, organized around the agricultural economy of the plateau rather than the tourism economy of places like Luang Prabang. The market in Pakse Loop in the early morning is one of the better markets I visited in Laos. Plateau vegetables, cabbages, carrots, tomatoes, varieties of greens I could not name that do not grow in the lowland heat. Forest mushrooms, coffee cherries in season, the produce of an altitude agriculture that is distinct from anything in the Mekong Valley. The guest houses in Pakse Loop are simple, clean rooms, basic amenities, prices that reflect the local economy rather than the tourist economy. $12 to $20 for a room, meals at local restaurants for $1 to $2. The evenings in Pakse Loop are quiet in a specific way. The plateau at night, without the ambient noise of a city, is the kind of quiet that people who have spent their lives in urban environments sometimes find uncomfortable before they find it extraordinary. No traffic noise, no construction, no music from bars, just the insects and occasionally the sound of rain on the roof if the weather turns. I slept better in Pakse Loop than I had slept anywhere in 3 weeks of traveling. The altitude helps. The cool air helps. But I think mostly it was the quiet, the specific, unperformed, genuine quiet of a place that has no particular interest in making noise for anyone. One more scene from the loop that I have not described yet. About halfway through the second day, I came around a bend in the road and found myself at the edge of the plateau. The road did not go further. It ended at a viewpoint. Informal, unmarked, just a widened section of road where the ground dropped away and the valley appeared. Far below, the Mekong, the river I had been following, in one way or another, for weeks, tiny from this height. A brown line moving through green flatness toward the horizon. On either side of the viewpoint, the plateau fell away in cliffs that the forest clung to at impossible angles. The waterfalls I had visited the day before were somewhere in those cliffs. I could see where the water had cut gorges into the rock, but could not see the falls themselves from here. A man was sitting at the viewpoint on a plastic stool, selling coffee. Naturally, he had a small gas burner and a filter, and a bag of plateau beans. I bought a cup. We sat at the edge of the plateau and drank coffee and looked at the Mekong far below and the mountains beyond it, and the sky above everything. He said something in Lao that I did not understand. I said something in English that he did not understand. We both laughed. We drank our coffee, then I got back on the motorbike and rode back toward Pakse, down the switchback road, out of the cool plateau air and back into the valley heat, carrying $11 of experience and a bag of coffee beans and the particular contentment of a day that went exactly right for reasons that had nothing to do with planning. That is the Pakse Loop. $8 for the motorbike, $3 for the fuel, 50 cents for coffee with the woman who grew it. The rest of it, the waterfalls, the villages, the man at the viewpoint, the children watching the refueling, the quiet of Pak Song at night was free. Go find your own version of it.